Okay, so vamos a empezar nuestra sesión de preguntas.
I don't know,
questions.
Is that on?
It's on.
Oh,
Yes,
okay.
thank you.
Yeah.
And before that, I just want to thank Victoria and Clara for spoiling us with all these wonderful things and organizing all the setting and everything. So thank you very much, Clara and Victoria.
Yes. And I want to thank you too. Thank you, wonderful, wonderful experience.
So what we're going to do is, I hope you have a lot of comments and questions for Maria Carreira. We're going to be passing the microphone, just not because we don't hear you, but because we need the audio for the video. So I don't know who would like to start. Sherry?
Hello. I don't think it's working.
No, it's not working.
Oh, I see. It's for. I see.
Oh my God.
Okay.
Okay. I have a couple questions, but my first one is you mentioned about the Spanglish thing, and what you said was probably true. It makes us just cringe sometimes. How do you navigate that, and how do you, in a class that's the reality of teaching both the non-heritage and heritage speakers people in the class, how do you navigate that whole Spanglish sort of?
Actually, I have this great trick. Yeah, that one. Thank you. So I ask my students to rewrite things in Spanglish all the time, and the stuff they come up with is so beautiful. So Sandra Cisneros, the writer, has a poem in English which says "Make love to me" in Spanish. And of course, this is not appropriate for high school, but I'm not advocating that. But you can do something similar for high school. And I say to them, hey, rewrite this poem in Spanglish. Make love to me in Spanglish. It's kind of ironic. The poem is "Make love to me" in Spanish, but it's written in English. But my students rewrite the whole thing in Spanglish, and it is so beautiful. It's fantastic. They've also rewritten like parts of the Constitution of the United States in Spanglish. So they take, well-known documents and they rewrite little bits of it to kind of reflect the linguistic reality and the situations that they know. And it's a great exercise because, then you can also compare it to the standard language. So it serves by way of comparison. It's a way of giving them access to academic, more advanced Spanish, but serving it to them in a different way, right?
If I can add to that, that's a question that, it's always there. And what we have done, and what the field is proposing also, is to use the Spanglish, first of all, to understand the social meaning and the meaning for identity, right? But also has a sociolinguistic component. It's a natural phenomenon when two languages come together. So in our classes, we study what is Spanglish from a linguistic point of view and from a sociolinguistic point of view. The research that has supported that is not something random. It has some kind of constraints and rules. How much grammar, we tend to think that the students don't use Spanglish because they do not know grammars, but in fact they have to know both to be able to combine the languages in that way. And then how it has been used in literature to, provide different effects on, identity,
connections to people.
Who use them when. Right. So it's a very rich material to reflect and teach students about, from languages in contact, very academic topic, to identity and emotional connection.
If I may, I'd like to read a poem about Spanglish that a student wrote. It's a little hard to read because it goes back and forth. Yes, soy American, pero también Latina. Sé hablar English, español y Spanglish. Yes, teacher, I can speak English sin hablar español. Oh, disculpe, I meant I'm sorry. ¿Por qué no debo mezclar los dos idiomas? Yes, soy bilingüe y estoy proud. Aunque a veces es stressful y challenging. Yes, mom, te puedo traducir para que hables con my teacher. Mom, I don't know cómo decirte lo que mi teacher te quiere decir. Yes, sé hablar inglés, pero es difícil traducir, apenas soy una niña. me estoy frustrando, I'm scared, ya no quiero traducir, me estoy equivocando. Maybe no soy bilingual. No puedo hablar ni English ni Spanish. Yes, voy a school para aprender, pero todos mis teachers hablan English. Casi nadie es como yo. Yes, soy latina. Don't laugh at me porque no sé what a word means o porque la pronuncie funny. ¿Es el pecado ser latina? Why so many críticas y risitas? Mejor help me, educate me, dame una mejor educación. Yes, soy latina. My language, Spanglish, es un don. Para que me entiendan, déjenme traducirle my language. Spanglish, it's a gift, my Latin gift. Isn't that nice? Yeah. That's talent. Yeah.
Code switching is,
Yeah.
in the Mexican American community, the border is amazing, how they can code switch. That's just close to mind.
Puerto Ricans, Dominicans,
Yeah.
Colombian Americans, everybody, yeah. Yes.
Is there enough, or let's say enough research regarding resilience and heritage learning?
No. I looked for it. There was the only paper where I could find the word resilience was in this Lucy Che article I found. She was talking about bilingual literary or literacy resilience or something like that. But she was using the word in a different way, not in a technical way that psychologists use the word resilience, which has very specific meanings and very specific components associated with it. So no, we've never looked at it. I tend to think that our perspective of Latino students is mostly a deficit base, where we want to fix what they're doing wrong. Despite all the talk about how well they speak English, how much they can do, our approach, maybe I should just speak for myself, my approach has been largely a deficit base. At the bottom of it has been deficit base instead of assets base, which is what resilience helps you find all these resources that they have.
And you haven't written
I wrote something very little about, I was asked to write a paper on Spanish loss in the United States. And when I started to write the paper, the loss of Spanish through generations, Spanish follows a 3-generation pattern of loss. The first generation that gets here speaks it well and is dominant in Spanish. Second generation is bilingual, already for a preference for English, with a preference for English. The third generation is largely English monolingual. If there's any Spanish left, it's just a vestige of the home language. So I wrote a paper about what was happening to Spanish in the U.S. And everything that we find is largely negative, but I closed the paper saying that we really needed to look into this because, for example, I found bloggers, popular bloggers, can't remember her name right now, but there are several of them talking about recovering Spanish and blogging out there from Mamás y Papás. The title of the blog was something like Mamás Latinas, about how to recover Spanish. And she raised questions of how do you recover Spanish if you haven't had it in your life? Where do you go for the resources? So these blogs actually show that there's an interest in recovering Spanish. I also found popular magazines about, what are some of the famous, I can never remember. My kids always make fun of me because I can never remember the names of these famous singers that are Latinos, Cristina Aguilera and all these people that they're really interested in recovering Spanish. So I found these popular articles about them going someplace. Shakira habla español, I think. She speaks Spanish, but some of the other ones, right? Wanting to recover Spanish and trying to study Spanish. These are things that we need to, when we do the equation, it's an elaborate equation with many factors surrounding what's happening to Spanish in the U.S. Resilience is definitely, linguistic resilience is definitely something we should factor into the equation because I think it's really important. Mm-hmm.
Who else? Any comments, reactions to what?
I wanted to give people a resource, and his name is Bill Santiago. He's a comedian. He's Puerto Rican, Puerto Rican who grew up in the Bronx, and he has a wonderful book out. I cannot remember the title of it, but he has a lot of YouTube clips that that are reflections on
Can you say his name again?
Bill Santiago.
Okay, Santiago. Okay.
And the other question I have is, I'm a parent now. How can we as parents push back when we're dealing with school districts that say to us, when our children are very young, how do we push back and say, wait a minute, my child is not ESL. This is...
That's right. I actually found cases where ESL worked well. So I don't want to come down on ESL. I have some writings here where students talk about what a positive experience and how helpful it was to be in ESL. But that's ESL done well. We know from a lot of research that ESL is not, in general, is not being done well, largely because it's missing the academic piece. The language is simplified, so they get the ESL books have very simplified language, so the students who are reading this language are not getting access to academic English. Since they're not exposed to academic English, they can't learn academic English, so which means they can't move on to college and other areas where they need to be able to use academic English. So I would say, first of all, have your student, your child tested by somebody. Testing is another big issue, by the way. Assessed by somebody who really knows how to assess students, because assessment is done in a bad way, many times a faulty assessment. But insist that your child be tested by somebody who knows how to assess. Insist that your child knows English, and that if you have a bad ESL program, first of all, your child doesn't need ESL if your child is bilingual, right? But if your child needs ESL, or if you know of a child that needs ESL, then make sure that the ESL is constructed in a way that benefits the child, not in a way that, what I found is that it separates them from other students, so they feel different, they don't want to be separated. They understand that the instruction is not very good because they see the simplified language. They know that it presents a block to AP courses and more advanced, the gifted programs, and all these interesting, great programs that are very enriching. They say it. But can you imagine they're 7 and 8 years old and they've already figured out that the ESL is a bad thing, stay away from it. So I'm not against ESL. I think ESL could be wonderful, but it just needs to be right. It needs to also look into the development of all these skills. It needs to be for gifted. You don't want to use. I have students here that they tell me, I figured out very quickly that ESL was for stupid people, and I didn't want to be with the stupid people. And then I have others that say, I'm not stupid. I didn't speak English, but I wasn't stupid. So, but they figure out that the perception, that the practice is that you treat people in ESL as if they were stupid.
Yes, I was listening to your comments so attentively because I work in that arena, bilingual education, and ESL has been my life. I was a French teacher so many years ago that I can't remember anymore. I used to teach French. But I agree with what you say about being that if you are truly bilingual and if you're properly assessed, then you do not need ESL, absolutely. What I have seen in my many years is that often when school districts think that children need ESL and the parents reject the program, many times children end up receiving special education services.
That's another thing. They get overdiagnosed. Yes.
A huge concern. At one point in my life, I was working in a school district with a percentage of children from Puerto Rico, and I was a bilingual director working on a master's degree. Decided to look at the data because I knew if you happen to have, I believed if you happen to have a Spanish last name, you had a great chance of being in special ed. And at the time, and this is a while back, 66% of the children in our district who had a Spanish last name were receiving special education services. So we want to move toward programs that are asset-based, such as dual language programs or bilingual education programs, but well-designed programs,
Right.
which unfortunately in Massachusetts, the bilingual education law has been gone, but we also had many programs that were remedial. And I think when you were saying
Remedial,
it's
yeah.
that ESL, if it's remedial, then
Exactly.
it's useless. If it's the foundation is to build academic language so students can have access to
Right.
those courses that they need to prepare them for college, then
Right.
it's a
right.
worthwhile effort. So just my
Yes, I think, it's well documented that language minority children are much more likely to be put in special education classes than other students, other children. And this goes back to faulty assessment, that the assessor misreads something the child is doing and interprets it to be a sign of a problem, fundamental problem with the child. So there's a need to address that aspect of it. But there's also, the ESL, students are kept in ESL way too long. So even if you have a good ESL program, students feel trapped in ESL, that they can't move on. Being trapped in ESL means you can't take the AP courses, you can't take the gifted classes, you can't take the more interesting classes, the more diverse classes. And what's interesting is I had students in this book that, I have a student who's quite a character. He's not my student, he's a friend of my son's. He's just a real character. And he said at some point, he went up to the teacher and he said, I want you to get me out of ESL. I don't need ESL anymore. And none of my friends need ESL. So I want you to stop it with the ESL thing. We're ready to, be with regular students. And he is just, one day he's going to be something big because he's one of these people, the personality is such a winning personality. I guess he presented it so well that they listened to him and he said, I entered the ESL program in my school. Isn't that amazing? Oh yes, absolutely, absolutely. But maybe we can raise awareness among our students that if you don't need it, if you need ESL, access what's out there that works. But if you don't need it, stand up for yourself. Tell the principal you don't need it. Have your money.
You can't eliminate those programs that don't touch general education.
No.
So they raise their expectations for the
Yeah.
students
Yeah,
who are bilingual.
it's a big problem. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, first of all, thank you so much for this presentation. I thought
Oh,
it was
thank you.
amazing,
Oh,
especially
thank you.
As you kind of put a outline to my life as a Latino student from an immigrant family here, but also with two younger siblings, and I see them in these stages already, so it's awesome. But I think this research is really important because it kind of reveals a lot about, I think social mobility is something that we touched a little bit about.
Yes.
And I think this research is valuable in that it can not only, talk about resilience and kind of hold on to language, but also about how Latino children and, in tandem, Latino parents and families perceive social mobility. And it's going to be very interesting to see how that is changing while the demographics are kind of flipping toward more to Latino identified families. So I'm excited to see what it'll come out.
I think that's a great comment about social mobility because we can't really do much about where they're starting, but we can do a lot about moving them to a better place. And I was curious, you were in the class I attended yesterday, is that right? Okay, so I was very curious because I came in with the usual stereotype that these are Harvard students. This was an Spanish HL class, and came in with the usual stereotype. These are Harvard students. They come from affluent backgrounds. They're privileged children, and they're not. And as I was listening to some of these students, and then Maria Lisa was telling me the life stories of some other ones, I said, I wish I could go back and visit the students and ask them, what did you do? How did you go from where you were started to here? What did we do? These are the stories we need to capture and reproduce in our other Latino students. I teach in a university that is a second-tier university in California. There's a UC system, and then there's a CSU system. It's a second-tier university, so it attracts students that maybe haven't done as well, haven't had as many opportunities. And as I was listening to these amazing young women that gave presentations yesterday in Maria Lisa's class, I was actually comparing them to my students. I was thinking, they could do that. They could do that. And I kept asking myself, what is it that kept them from coming here and doing that here where there's so many opportunities? What is it that kept them back to where they are. Not that back to where they are is that bad, but I would love to study the combination of factors, and we would hear from you, what is it that propels these students forward and keeps propelling them forward? Because if we capture that recipe, and it may be many, many recipes, it may be a whole book of recipes, maybe we can really move forward in a very promising way.
Again, thank you for this wonderful
thank you.
talk and
Thank
for
you.
all your research and
you.
When you were describing and even at the very beginning in the first interview about Doodle, I was thinking of my own background as a bilingual, before I became bilingual, as I was 4 or 5 years old. Anyway, so my question was, I teach at the university, and it's a university where we don't have, I'd like to see it someday, a course for heritage learners, just for them, whereas I have some heritage learners with the other students. So, like, how do you approach it then, that you want them, the heritage learners, to be able to contribute in their own way, and yet you don't want to seem as if you're, privileging them or in the context of the others.
Right. That's a difficult question to answer. It requires a long answer, but I'm just going to give you a few ideas. Well, first of all, let me start out with the obvious, that programs should allocate funds for creating courses for heritage speakers. We need that. But, taking things as they are in your program where you have mixed classes, we did a survey at UCLA of hundreds of programs, and I was struck by, excuse me, a statement that kept coming up by the teachers who teach mixed classes, which is what you have, where you have both types of students. They felt very comfortable saying that in a class where there aren't that many heritage speakers, they pay no attention to the needs of the heritage speakers. They just run their class like it's an L2, and that's it. Keep in mind they were responding to a survey by the National Heritage Language Resource Center. So the fact that they felt so comfortable responding that way tells me probably that that's the generalized attitude, that you absolve from attending to the needs of heritage language learners if you happen to have your heritage language learners in a mixed class. If you have a specialized class, then you need to do something. But if you're in a mixed class, the program put them there, and you let them fend for themselves. So maybe that's the first thing I would say, but it doesn't sound like that's an advice you need to hear. It's not, because you're concerned about attending to their needs. But if I had to say it to a large public, I would say point number one, they're there. You need to attend to them. You can't ignore them just because they're a small minority or whatever size they are. Point number two is that we know that heritage language learners come to the classroom wanting to explore that connection, that identity part of them. So you need to take opportunities to give them the opportunities to explore that, to connect whatever it is you're doing in the classroom to personal quandaries they may have about their identity, about who they are, about who others are, and how others view them. You mentioned some of them may not want to, you don't want to privilege, or you may not want to single them out, and that's always an issue. So one recommendation I made yesterday to the people at the workshop is that I use exit cards for that. Whenever I sense that I'm getting to a topic that's uncomfortable, I have a good number of students that are undocumented. And they now come to me and tell me that they're undocumented, but I went for many years without realizing that so many of our students at Cal State Long Beach are undocumented. It's now, people know that I'm friendly to undocumented students, and so they come and tell me their stories. But when we talk about the topic of immigration, they clam up. And of course, they don't want to say anything, understandably so. But that doesn't mean I don't want to hear what they have to say, or that the class shouldn't hear what they have to say, because they have important contributions to make in that regard. So that's a day when I give exit cards, and I say, without identifying yourself, write down something you wish you could have said. If you don't want to identify yourself, I give them the option. If they want to identify themselves, fine. If not, fine too. But if you heard something that you wanted to react to, but you didn't feel comfortable reacting to it, put it down, and I'll bring it up in the class in a way that doesn't identify you. So that's another way of dealing with them if they're uncomfortable. I can talk to you, you know, one-on-one about the different ways, strategies, classroom strategies for dealing with the two populations. Oh, you know, one thing I wanted to mention actually, for programs that don't have heritage language classes, what I found through the book is the importance of clubs, student-run clubs. They love that, you know, and it gives them an avenue for exploring their identity, asserting themselves, making themselves more visible to an administration, which in my university, the largest group of students, 30-some%, that's the largest group of students, is Latino, and the administration, I'm sorry to say, is blind to these students. Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
I just want to add about this in terms of the courses, right? Because when I came to Harvard, there was no courses on heritage for heritage learners, and I just decided to do one. I started making some kind of noise talking about, you know, have you heard the latest about the research on heritage languages? And everybody was kind of, no, not really. We have so many in our classes. And I decided to put together events, symposiums, you know, and then I say I really want to try and see if students would come to this class. So I put together the syllabus, the website, all that, and it was very interesting because I sent the announcement for the class and I asked students to send their application forms with, you know, Harvard time 2 months in advance, right? And I didn't get any. I was so concerned, I was so disappointed. I was, no, this is going to be, you know, a failure because they have other priorities. It was going to be, how you call it, not a requirement, but what's the word? Elective, thank you. And then that day, the first day of classes, I decided to go to class just in case. And when I opened the classroom, there were 15.
No.
Where is the mariachi? And 8 stayed, and it was such a wonderful experience for all of us. The following semester were 4, and now I have 9. But I just did it. And it was on top of all the other things that I had to do, but I really wanted to try it, and it has worked out. So that's.
You know, the other day I was walking through a hallway at UCLA, and I saw this sign that talked about student health advocates. And I stopped and I stared at the sign. I thought, wouldn't it be nice to have student HL advocates? So it's not what you're doing, which is so important, but you guys go talk to other students and tell them about the importance of these classes. You probably are the best ambassadors for that. You know each other better, and you're young, and you think alike. So we need to build on that strength.
And they have,
Yeah.
because they are, you know, wonderful supporters.
Thank you for your delightful.
Oh, thank you.
My question is this: I have been home speaker teacher for a long, long time, and I would like to listen for you. Do you have any recommendation to develop curriculum in the school for heritage speakers?
Yes, but I think what I'm going to tell you, you're not going to like. But maybe not. Maybe I shouldn't guess. Okay, maybe I shouldn't guess. So. First of all, my PhD is in linguistics, and not sociolinguistics, formal linguistics, okay? So I'm going to start out what I'm going to say by saying, I love grammar. I don't have a problem with grammar. As a matter of fact, I'm very inclined. I love grammar, okay? And for most of my career, which now spans, 25 years, I would say for maybe 22 of those years, I've been grammar first, grammar first, grammar first. And it's only when I started to finally, you know, finish the book that and then I started to read all the things that wow, maybe that's not the best approach. And even making it communicative, just when it's the end of the point, the objective, the final objective of instruction, I've come to have very ambivalent feelings, true rejection of grammar. And here's what I've done that I think works really well. My students absolutely love it. So it's project-based. I now have a project-based course. And what they do is, the first half of the semester, they research their field of study. I don't know what level you're teaching, so maybe, you know, that's different. Okay, but it could still work. And I'll tell you what I'm going to do with this later, what my plan is for this project. So they research the field of study under very guided circumstances. So they have to read 10 articles in Spanish on their field of study. And I teach them how to read, because a lot of them, I teach them how to read for learning vocabulary, for learning expressions, etc. They have to put together a glossary of key terminology. And the glossary is not a listing of words with the Spanish translation. The glossary is, they go on the corpus of Spanish. BYU, Brigham Young University, has a corpus of Spanish. You enter a word, and then they give you like hundreds of sentences that this word has appeared with in real language. And also you can find out like the 5 or 6 or whatever number of words that most commonly appear with this word. So I tell them, for example, if you're going to learn how to use tapa, you probably just can't just learn tapa. You have to learn botella, well, whatever. You have to learn all the other words, abrir, cerrar, enroscar, that go with the word. So we learn what it means to learn a word. And then at the end, they have to put what I say, what I tell them, I intimidate them, I say it has to be a perfect presentation. You've been working on this for 7 weeks. It has to be so polished. You have to come in with all your words practiced, with perfect PowerPoint presentation, well-dressed, well-groomed. They look beautiful when they come in. And they give beautiful presentations, comparable to the ones, that's why I was saying my students can get here. I saw my students do these kinds of presentations. Now, the second presentation, I remember I said do 2 presentations. The second presentation, I say to them, now you're going to build on that topic, something related to your profession, but it has to be related to something that's going on in the Spanish-speaking world. And I was telling Maria Luisa, I had a student that for her, you follow the same format. You read about it, you write a glossary, and then you do a presentation. I was telling Maria Luisa that I have a student who for her first presentation told the class how to become a police detective. Do any of you know what you need to do to become a police detective? It is fascinating. I learned so much. And she did it in Spanish, and she did it beautifully. She brought handcuffs, muñecas, everything. She just taught us so much. I was thinking, I wish I had known about that. Maybe that's what I would have gone into that line of business. I would like to think of myself as sleuth. But anyway, that was her first presentation. Her second presentation is amazing, because then she said, maestra, that's what they call them, I want to look at the drug cartels and gang violence in Latin America, but from the perspective of a detective. Can I do that? I said, of course. The thing is that not only did she find it captivating, I am riveted by what she is finding out. The point is that they're learning so much language. They're getting so much input to Spanish, and they're so engaged. Even I am engaged. I have to recommend a movie that she recommended to me. It's called Sin Nombre. It's a Spanish, it's an amazing movie, and so that's the approach I'm taking now. My department may not like it because I'm not spending all that much time, conjugando and all this other stuff, but that is what keeps them. I haven't had a single person drop out since I've had that approach to teaching. They love it, and frankly, I love it too, because I'm learning all sorts of things now around the dinner conversation. I say, hey, do you know what the difference is between a coach and a whatever? I hear all these things, and I learn from them too. So it's interesting for them, and it's interesting for me. That's
I just want to share. Storytelling is so important when you are teaching whatever subject it is, but especially for languages. I designed a course to teach Spanish through Hispanic literature, and I have a blog. And I was working at Texas, at the Austin, Texas, and I opened this course at the library, at the public library for free. Everybody who wanted to come and let's learn Spanish through Hispanic literature. To make the story short, let me explain something before. The method that I decided to use is to read a short story, discuss it, find the strange words that they don't understand, strange grammar, and I was going to try to explain everything. At the end of the class, as a formative assessment, I asked them to choose 8 words out of the reading and construct a collective story with those 8 words. So the stories that they were building were amazing, because I always started saying, just let your imagination fly. Don't, if you have a word that says casa and you have another word that says piano, no, piano is related. Something that is not related to the house. Something that is not related. Tuna. Yeah. Tiburón. Exactly. If you have, if you see casa and tiburón, don't block your mind saying a tiburón is not possible to live in a house. Try to fit that tiburón in the house somehow. So it was great because they built some strange stories. Some others were not that strange, but very well constructed. What was most important for me was that rainy days, cold days, awful days, traffic. When you expect to show up to your room and see nobody, you show up the room and the room was totally full with students. I sometimes used to joke with them and say, "What are you doing here? It's raining outside. It's cold. Why aren't you at home?" So, but it means that they really enjoy the class.
Yeah.
To make the short, the story short, I came down to Boston, and one of my students, who was the advanced one, she took over of the class, and she's the teacher of the class.
That's nice.
And I've been here for 3 years, and she's been teaching the course. So, and she still have a lot of students attending, and it's amazing because she sends me some information about the course, how is it running, and all the stories. At least when I was there, when I was teaching the class, all the stories that we wrote together, all of the stories are in the blog. So anybody can check the blog, how they learned, what the mistakes were, what are the most recurrent mistakes that they have. And they send me also personal stories, so I had to correct all the stories, so you can see all the mistakes of the students, what are the grammar problems that they have. But what I want to say with this is that it's unbelievable how storytelling compels the student, and how you can use it in so many ways. And of course, if you are interested in check just to find stories, a lot of literature right now is the blog. The blog is iquemecuentas.blogspot.com. But right now you can find it, I think, easy. Ique Me Cuentas, and you will have a lot of literature over there.
That's wonderful. Ique Me Cuentas. I'm going to look it up. .com. .blogspot.com. Okay. And to follow up, I said I was going to tell you what my plans are for this project. I was talking to a friend about these presentations, how amazing they were, and she said, "Why don't you put a bunch of them together and take them and kind of put a movie together and go to a high school and show it? High school kids need to know, some high school kids may want to think about becoming a detective or becoming a trainer or whatever, these students want to be. And it's better they hear it from young people, well presented, well thought out. It's an inspiration. And so that's next time I teach the course, I'm going to start working on that, putting together these little presentations that can then be put into a library and be made accessible to young people in high school.
Another resource that is endless with heritage teachers and with any student, it's art. Because you have so many Latino artists that, represent some of their struggles in art. So it's a wonderful way to start a class. You show them a picture, you tell them what to see, you analyze everything. You can describe, and then you can find the narration, the story behind that. You find out about the author. And what I've done with foreign language learners and heritage learners is that for a final paper, it's a final project, I ask them to do an art project. They have to come up with any kind of art, an object that they have to design, but it has to reflect what they have learned about themselves through the course. And it's fascinating because they come up with very simple things, but the symbolism around it is just amazing. So they have to write the paper first describing what they did. Oh, I did a bottle covered with such and such or whatever, and I use these kind of materials, and then they have to interpret it. This material represents, the fragility or the Spanglish or whatever there, because they have to be related to themes that we, talk about in class and their own experience and the process of learning in the class. And that's a wonderful project. Anything else? Oh, can I have it?
Thank you, Maria and Lisa. This has been great. And I just have a question and just want to get your feedback because I've always been a little conflicted. I have been teaching Spanish for heritage learners for a couple of years now. And traditionally, in my program, it has been taught that the topics that the students faced or the communities face: identity, immigration, discrimination, and a lot of the literature dealing with that, especially U.S. Latino writers. And I had a feeling, at least for some of my students, that they really wanted to go beyond that. I mean, this is their reality. They want to connect with the bigger trends of Hispanic, culture and literature. They're dying to read Garcia Marquez. They don't want to read about the Latino boy struggling in. It's a balancing act because, on one sense, in one point, you are trying to, connect for them all to connect, but they see themselves that they're not just what other people think of them as. These are the Latino kids of the U.S. They are part of a bigger and much more and richer culture. And we're teaching regular students about the amazing works of Hispanic literature or art, and we're still caging or limiting our Latino students to the same things that I just find it too narrow. So I just wanted to have bring it up and have your thoughts on that.
I think it's a great comment. I think it's fantastic, If that's what your students want, then that's what you owe them. And you're right, you can expand their universe if they're ready for it. And that's why I say, I used to assume that I knew what they needed and what they wanted. You need to talk to them. It sounds like you've talked to them and you understand, having talked to them, what they want and what they need, what will keep them studying Spanish. That's sort of my philosophy. Give them what they want and use what they want to also give them a little bit of what they need. Right?
I would like to offer a few suggestions with working with heritage learners. Right now in my advanced placement class, I have a very large number of heritage learners, which is wonderful. One thing that I have used as an asset is video clips from specific places.
Yes.
And I have, for example, one student who is Mexican, and I had a video clip from Eugenio Derbez, and it's about the scene is a daughter and a father, and the daughter's using teenage language, and the father is saying, "Don't talk like that." And I actually used her as an interpreter because people don't know idioms from specific places, and so that is one way of using your students as an asset. The other thing that I have found is I used to very much have this attitude of grammar with heritage learners, and I realized, wait a minute, why not just do triage? When you see it,
exactly, right.
When you see this,
right. Which is what you're doing too. Yeah.
For the big deal with my heritage learners is that they're using present subjunctive when they need to use past. So what do? You have to say pasado con pasado and give examples but certainly do it as they need it and not so much the drill and kill approach.
Right, exactly. Some great ideas.
One last question, I don't know, two more, a comment.
For the same line, I talk always to my student, read the classic first.
Sure,
before.
the ones that turn you
So
on.
I start with El Quijote. I start with Celestina, with my student home speakers, and they love it.
They love it. Good. It's the reason why they're classics, right?
No, I guess the other thing I was saying, sorry about the art project, I think the most successful field trip I just took was to go to see the Goya exhibit.
Oh.
I did a lot, I think I would say it was like painting walls. I did about 80% prep before they got there. By the time they got there, those kids were just pumped.
Oh.
And now I really want to think about how to take what they spent. I mean, high school adolescents, you take a group of 30 kids to the museum, there's always one or two people that, oh, this is so boring. You know? Not one of them.
Yeah.
Not one. We went through all 8. They just, and we timed it. It's 18 minutes in this one, 18 minutes in each one, and we had gone through this whole thing. And now I want to figure out how to use, well, what kind of projects could I do? And I'm open to ideas. I've been listening to all these things like this, and I was thinking a conversation with Goya. We also watched a
yes.
movie from the East, and there's one from East Germany in 1971 that was produced by Russia and East Germany during the Cold War. So we watched segments of the Inquisition on that, compared it with Mel Brooks's Inquisition, which was interesting at the same time. So I want to take all that, and I have all this really great enthusiasm and knowledge that they have and learned. We read the Spanish that's written on the bottom of the, you can use it for the language because he has all these comments. And so now I'm willing to hear some ideas about how I can take all this great experience that they had and put it together for a project for the end of the semester. I'm willing for any suggestions from anybody here.
I think it's going to take us another workshop. We'll think about it. We think about it. I just want to mention the work of Cecilia Colombi. Also, it's very important because she works from a functional perspective on written language and the genre perspective. So the students learn to write different genres. That's what I do in my class. I structure the program so they can learn how to write different kinds of texts. And we analyze different kinds of texts, the grammar that goes with each one of these texts. So that's another possibility. And related to the classics and, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, what I've done in other classes is, for example, I read Augusto Monterroso from Guatemala, Mr. Taylor. And it's such a wonderful book, because short story, because it relates this history, complex history of the U.S. being in the Latin American first, before Latin America is immigrating to the U.S., right? So a lot of people say, well, I mean, why is Hondurans, Salvadorians, these people coming in? Well, it's because, we went there first. So what does that history teach us about the present? And all the symbols that Marquez, Monterroso, all these writers use to portray American history and culture that goes and had invaded or been embedded in Latin American countries, and now how has resulted in all this immigration. So you can make that link through history, and it's always another discipline, and you can work, if you can do that with history teachers, and it will be a wonderful, more interdisciplinary project. Will be great. Well, we really want to thank you, Melissa.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.